start earlier, and it's not as complicated as you think. If you have a Zoom account and if your podcast is under 40 minutes, it's free. So stop overthinking it, making it so complicated. Give it a go and see what happens.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
What's up, podcaster? It's your host, Adam Adams. And today I'm joined with David Creel, who is a coach who serves other people. He calls himself a blind spot coach, where he serves people that are going through problems. And his podcast directly serves what he does for a living. I've got tons of questions for him. He does it a different way. So if you are a coach, if you're listening and you're like, maybe I should start a coaching business, or I'm thinking about doing a mastermind, I'm thinking about coaching, I'm thinking about serving, consulting, serving other people like within my niche, they're business owners or whatever it is, I think you're going to learn some things in a little bit different way by hearing how David does his podcast, what's going right, what's going wrong, because it's absolutely like the first time I'd ever heard of anybody doing it this way. And I think it's quite interesting. And just so you're aware, the podcast name is Masterclass of One. So Masterclass of One, all of the links. So David's bio is in the show notes. So you want to check out his bio, just scroll down. His link to his social media that he wanted to share, also down in the bio. How about his website? That's in the bio. You scroll down, you'll see it in the show notes. And finally, the link to his podcast, if you want to check it out, if you want to pull some ideas from it or just learn from him, scroll down. The link is there. David, I want to start here. So you help people that face challenges. You serve them. You help them. You are a coach yourself. And I think it's a Ziegler type of coach as well. So when I'm looking at you, you've had your podcast for a year and a half, 50 episodes, and you're helping people get out of their blind spot. You do your podcast much differently than I had heard. And I want you to start there by telling us, let's just say, give us the background of why did you do your podcast, the style that you're doing it, where you're not interviewing, but you're kind of coaching and it's being recorded.
Well, yeah, first off, thanks for allowing me to be on the show. I stole the idea for my podcast from someone else.
Okay. I hadn't heard of.
Right. So I heard of a guy named Rich Litvin who wrote the book, The Prosperous Coach. And if you're a coach out there and you have not read The Prosperous Coach, what are you doing? That is must-read material. And on his podcast, he coaches people live on the spot. And it doesn't really matter how long it goes, because the point is, we're not trying to solve all the world's problems. We're trying to solve a single problem the person is facing. And then once they have an insight, which is a sight from within, then they know what to do after that, because it's in their blind spot. So I liked the idea of what Rich did. And I said, well, I wonder if I can coach people live on the spot. And here we are.
So I've kind of done that on my podcast. And it's not something that has ever been regular, but there was certainly a couple of months of time where I tried to incorporate at least one of those a week. And so on my podcast, and if you're listening, you might resonate with this. You might be able to see these three different styles. On my podcast, one of the things that I did a lot was I interviewed somebody who was successful at podcasting. Mm-hmm. And I got their story, and I'm hoping that my listener learns from what they've done right and what they've done wrong. Another side benefit of the same thing, still sticking to interviewing a podcaster, is my business serves podcasters. Now I'm having a conversation with them for free. Nobody's paying anybody anything. I'm just having a conversation with somebody who is my avatar or the perfect client that I could work with. I'm adding value to them because they're getting exposure, and they're adding value to my listener as well. Mm-hmm. That's an interview. The second way is I do some solo episodes, and I still do a lot of solo episodes where it's a shorter episode where I just pour into my avatar, my perfect listener. I have that person in mind, and I'm like, what do they need? What are they going through? What are their blind spots, if you will? And so I'll create that. The third type that I did for a very short amount of time, and that David does constantly, is having somebody come on and basically ask you questions. You're basically coaching them, and it's being recorded. what are the benefits to all these? There's a benefit to interviewing people because you might work with them. There's a benefit to interviewing people because it could help your audience. And there's a benefit if you're doing a solo because now your audience really knows who you are. There's a huge benefit also with what Dave is doing and with Rich. I think from the Prosperous Coach book, is that right? Rich, what was his last name?
Litvin, Litvin.
Okay, I'm going to make sure that my team who edits this show, we're going to put the Prosperous Coach book in the show notes. So if you're listening and you don't want to have to find it, it'll be like an affiliate link. So I might make 5 cents when you download the Audible or something, but those will be in the show notes as well. So if you want to check out that book, if you are a coach and David says like, that's one that you absolutely need, then that's where it'll be. So what David does and what Rich Litvin does is on the spot, he's coaching somebody. They're asking him questions, he's pouring into them. Now, these things help a lot of people, but some of the benefits could be the people that might hire you, they might get a really good feel for your style and for your skills. And so that can really help them to be able to hire you. Now, what I'm about to ask David, do you go by Dave or David? I should say which way is better?
Preferably David, but...
Okay. Well, I'm glad I asked. And what I could have done is asked in the very, very beginning. One is just faster. And I think most humans are like, let me just go to that. Let me act like we're buddies. But we should always ask first. So David, he's doing that. And what I want to ask him is he charging for that coaching session or is it free? Is it possible that he starts working with the person that's on there or is he already working? Or how does he get those people to be willing to expose themselves like in all the things that they're worried about and it goes out on a podcast? And I've got other questions that like, do you end up getting people calling you and saying, I've got that thing, it helped me? So here goes a few questions. David, as you're doing this, where do you get the most value? Let me ask you that. Where do you get the most value by having these calls? Where does that come?
I get the most value from serving another human being. And to answer one of the questions, it's 100% free. I've never charged anyone to be on the podcast. And it also helps me build my coaching muscle because I'm coaching someone live on the spot. And people don't like to listen to a podcast where I sit there and say nothing for 45 seconds. So yeah, it helps me because the reason why it's called Masterclass of One is because I'm only concerned about the person I'm speaking to. Because the idea of the podcast is if you have something similar that you're facing, even though it's not going to be exact because we're all different people, but if you have something similar, you could put yourself in the person I'm speaking to's shoes, like I'm asking you the questions. And then okay, maybe you think about something different or think about it a different way that you didn't think of before. And if that happens, that's amazing because that's the point. The point is it's very specific because people have different problems and different challenges they're facing. And I'm only speaking to the person I'm speaking to.
I have a couple questions, follow-up questions. So let me share what I'm hearing. I meant to mention to the listener that there was another benefit when you have somebody asking you questions. And I was going to say that it helps you grow your craft. And I love that you filled that even though I didn't like mention it or ask it, where you were talking about your coaching muscle. So these are free, 100% free, as you mentioned. You're not charging that person to come on the podcast. And it allows you to do all of the things that we've done, but also helps you master your own craft or grow your coaching muscle because you're practicing, you're working it out. And like you said, you don't want to have like 45 seconds of silence. So you're always staying on top of your game. And I like that. When I did it with podcasters and they were asking me questions or potential podcasters, some of the things that I did with that, and David, you might already be doing this. And now if you're listening, you could also do this. Some of the things that I gained from it was that I had my team take the transcript of like every episode that had come out. And I said, put into 2 boxes, people that were about to launch a podcast and people that had a podcast. Put it in 2 boxes. The most common questions that you're hearing with these 2 months worth of episodes. There was like 8 of them or something, And so they took all 8 of the brand new people and they took all 8 and then they wrote out those questions. And that helps me grow my craft as well. Like, of course, being on there and answering the questions benefits. Also, I can start creating lead magnets and things with whatever comes out of that. So you mentioned that it was free, and that's what I did when I did it for a short amount of time. I just said, your payment is that it goes on the podcast. That's your payment. The only way that you pay is you're paying it forward. Other people can gain the value. So I like that this was 100% free. And the question that I'm coming up with, which I doubt happens a lot, but it might happen. So I'm curious what you do about it, how you go about it. Imagine like the listener right now who's a new coach, maybe not as experienced as you. They want to do it. They want to help other people in whatever their niche is. And they're thinking, yeah, this is cool. Like, this is a good way to get content. I can kill two birds with one stone. I can help somebody and help a lot of other people. I can grow my craft and I can grow my audience all at the same time. And they're asking themselves right now, David, what if something goes wrong? They might say to themselves, I've had conversations before. I've had a conversation with people at times and I left the conversation and I didn't feel like there was much value. I was coached by somebody and I walked away and I didn't gain anything. Nothing, everything that he said I already knew or whatever they're thinking. So sometimes things might not go right, is my point. Somebody listening definitely might have some nervous or anxiety about like being on the spot like you, although they can grow from it. The question is, when things might not go right, or when we're not able to get to the point for that person, when we're not able to support them, if something goes wrong, like what then happens? Do we not publish the episode? Does that never happen? Should the person who's listening not even worry about that? How do you think through that? Because I'm wondering, that may have been a concern for you as well. So how do you overcome it?
Okay, so that's a great question. What I tell people, say you're going to be on my podcast, before I hit record, I say, look, if you say something that could criminally indoctrinate you or you're going to fillet someone on my podcast, but that just what comes out, I said, then I won't publish it. It's not that big a deal. It's not like it has to be done. And I tell them that before then, and that lets them and me relax.
Cool.
I send it to my guy. He masters it. He puts the intro and outro in. He sends it back to me and I upload it. That's how it is. There's no editing. There's no nothing.
Yeah.
So that puts it at ease. And then I had one a couple months ago. Literally, there was a lightning storm while we were doing it and my power cut off in the middle of the podcast. I mean, cut off, dead sentence, middle of the sentence, it cut off.
Yep.
So I texted the girl back. I said, hey, I just lost power. Give me a second. When it comes back on, do you have time? And she said, yeah. So I just hit record again and picked up where we left off. And I just make this and this one episode. And I got on there and I said, okay, well, I had a lightning strike and we lost power. That's why I got cut off mid-sentence and I just went with it. Yeah. So I don't try to pressure myself to get it right because technically I can't get it wrong. And I never go into a podcast thinking that I can't help this person. It doesn't even cross my mind. Because if I dig far enough and you give me enough time, we'll get to an answer.
Okay, perfect.
So that's how I would handle that.
In a little bit, after we talk a little bit more about this podcast strategy, I want to find out just some of the ways that you were able to text that person. And to you, you're like, well, I just had her number. But to the listener, they're like, how do you get the number? What's the process of doing that? And I have a special way that I do for me. So I'm going to ask you, like, how do you get that right information from them? But first, I've got basically one kind of big question, and that is the benefits that we've already mentioned that happen from having a podcast like yours is you are mastering your craft, you are serving the listener, and you might serve the coachee, and they might hire you after kind of getting a taste. So what I'm asking is, where do you focus most of your energy? Let's just pretend like there was only one piece, one of those three things that you were really getting the value on, or where you would want to put it in, like the most effort to make sure it happens. Would it be that you're just mastering your craft? Would it be that you're serving a lot of listeners? Or would it be more that you are helping that person on the call and they might hire you?
I'm serving them regardless if they'll ever hire me or not.
Okay.
So literally my whole focus on the podcast is the person I'm speaking to.
Okay.
Because that's why it's called Masterclass of One, because it's not Masterclass of Many.
Yeah. Well, let me ask it in a different way, because you definitely answered the question and I'm feeling like I might have just phrased it a little bit differently. So I feel like I understand you have a good heart, and I feel like I understand that like you serving that person is a benefit. But what I'm asking is, if there was only one of these three things, only one of these three, because I understand that your heart's in the right place. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm saying, like, for you, what is the reason that you started that podcast? What do you want it to do for you or for your business or for your network? Is it only that you're serving people for free? I don't think so, even though it sounds like you're saying that. Or is it that you could serve a lot of listeners? Or is it that you just want to be better at your craft? If you could only pick one of those three things, master your craft, serve your listeners, or get paid by the people that you're coaching for free, which of those three would it be?
Option D.
Option D. Okay, fair enough.
I started the podcast for potential future clients to, like you said, get a taste of what it's like to work with me without actually working with me.
So that to me would be B, serving the listener.
Okay, then B.
Okay, cool. Cool. Awesome. So going back to this part where you sent a text. So what I have noticed for me and my side is that sometimes it is hard to get somebody to give you their phone number. And I don't know why it's sometimes hard, but we've built it into and maybe sometimes it's because the person that you're having they don't want you to have their cell phone number because they feel like they're so well known that they don't want to give that out. And so it can be sensitive. Maybe the listener's thinking to themselves, like, how do I get somebody's phone number? Well, I figured out my way, and I'm curious because with that lightning strike, you immediately were able to connect with her. And I think that some of the people listening probably don't have that option because they don't have a process that gets them like the right information, like a phone number. So could you share your process, like to onboard? The question is, David is onboarding a person who's going to be on his podcast. How does he get the right information from them? On the phone, in an email? Is it automated? What is it like?
No, it's definitely not automated. And my favorite email of all time is 2 words, call me. I hardly ever do email. Hardly ever. I check my email maybe twice a day, maybe. And what I heard, which I think is true the more I think about it, I heard this literally just this morning. If you don't have someone's cell phone number, they're not a serious prospect for you. Because if I have someone's access to their phone, I'm never going to send them an email, ever. Because I want to skip the line of the email because the email is very busy and noisy. I get 60 emails a day and I don't want 59 of them.
Yeah.
But if I can get somebody to send a text message, I've had somebody say, why don't you send me an email? And then after about 2 email conversations, it's like, you know what? Why don't you just call me at this number? Then we're going to have a 3-minute conversation. We're going to be done because I don't want to play email tag with you.
Yeah.
So I just ask them. And the girl or the lady that was in when the lightning strike happened, she lives in the UK. So I have her number on WhatsApp and I texted her and I said, hey, I lost a lightning strike. Give me 10 minutes. I'll be back up. And yeah, I ask for it.
It sounds simple.
Yeah. It is simple. It is simple to ask someone, but how many times maybe you don't have the number because you haven't asked for it?
Yeah. For us, like when you scheduled to be on this interview, for example, we gave you an email template that basically tells you kind of what to expect and some of the questions that we might ask, to wear headphones, to use a microphone. And there's a link to Calendly where you actually book. And so for us, the process is on Calendly, it says, what is the best number to reach you? What is your email, name, the link to your podcast, whatever. And so that's where it is put. And I think that we say something like where it's asking for the phone number in case something goes wrong. I think it says that. And that has helped me to be able to get the cell phone number of some of the more famous people that might have hundreds of thousands or millions of followers that don't really want to give that. at least we have a way to get a hold of them. They might put a Google number or their assistant's number sometimes, but it has helped a good handful of times for me. Have you ever had to call somebody other than that one time?
What do you mean?
Yeah, I mean in the podcast, like the people that are going to be on your podcast being coached by you. Other than this lightning strike, have there ever been a different time that the phone number came in useful to you?
No, because I recorded on Zoom. So again, it's not edited, but the audio goes to, after you finish the Zoom call, I take the audio file and I send it to the guy who helps me with that. But for the first 40 episodes, I didn't do that. I had no intro music, no outro music, no nothing. I just, it's what it is.
Yeah.
And then what I do is I take the video file off Zoom and I put it on my YouTube channel.
Yeah. It's killing two birds with one stone.
Yeah. Video and audio. I got YouTube audience and I got podcast audience. My podcast comes out, I think, on Monday mornings, and the exact same episode comes out on YouTube on Tuesday.
That's cool. For me, the phone numbers have come in handy a lot. Like, if Mike Power today was scheduled to go out, so I could have called you or whatever. If the person wasn't on and it was like, it's been 3 or 4 minutes past the time, I might just give them a call. This happens for me because I'm doing 7-ish episodes recorded per week. And I would say this happens probably 2 or 3 out of that time. So not quite half, but I constantly am like, hey man, are you jumping on the Zoom? Are we going to get started on recording? So I'm grateful that I have people's numbers. I think it comes in handy. And I think it's a good takeaway for the listener as well. I want to get a little bit more info on you, the value that you're getting from your podcast, some things that you learn. We're going to take a quick break. So we'll do all that plus your best advice ever. We'll be right back. Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, growyourshow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that, like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show. We're back with David Creel, and we're talking about how he does his podcast, what he's learned along the way, how he does it instead of interviewing somebody or doing solos, the way that he's being able to connect with the right people, learn, master his craft, serve his listener, and serve the coachee for free by recording an actual coaching session. And now what I want to talk about is really, what has David learned along the way? He's been doing this over a year and a half. And basically from that, what he's learned, if he started all over again, what would he do differently? So that's really going to be my first question. The second one is what challenges he might have right now today. Third is, how does he get guests? Because I know a lot of people listening, you might think it's scary to get guests. I'm not sure how to get guests. And David's being able to grab his guests regularly. He's done over 50 episodes. So how does he do that? And then we'll end with his best advice. So David, what have you learned along the way? If you did everything all over again, what would you do differently starting now?
What I'd have done differently is I'd have started it sooner.
I like that.
So I had the idea, like I said, and then I kind of molded around. It's like, oh, can I really do this? Can I do it? Well, okay. So give it a go. That's what I done differently. Just as they say in the UK, give it a go. See what happens. Because I think one of the misconception is everyone's going to know me. Well, no, everyone's not going to know you. No one's going to know you. Because even the top podcast is probably Joe Rogan or whoever the top podcast guy is, and he gets, I don't know, 100 million downloads. I'm just making this up. I have no idea. Well, compared to the almost 8 billion people on planet Earth, Joe Rogan's a no one too. No one knows you exist. So seeing how no one knows you exist, try. And there's nothing saying that, say you have an interview style format, or you're a solo podcast, or you have like mine where you're coaching people, or you want to interview whoever. You can just pivot and do something different. You're not stuck to one thing for the rest of your whole life. And you might like for me, I used to have a different podcast that we won't talk about here, but I used to have a different one. I didn't like it, but it was a solo episode. I didn't like it. I didn't like talking to myself. So I like the interaction with other people, which is why when I heard about this, I said, oh, this is pretty cool. So you're not stuck with it. Start earlier, and it's not as complicated as you think. If you have a Zoom account, you can record audio and video off Zoom. And if your podcast is under 40 minutes, it's free. And YouTube channel is free. And like this microphone I'm using cost me $65 or $70. And you don't have to have a microphone. So what I've learned is stop overthinking it, making it so complicated, and give it a go and see what happens.
Good stuff. I want to move to challenges you've met along the way, or especially if there's anything that's a challenge that you're facing just even this month that you're working on, struggling with, trying to achieve with the podcast.
Well, with most people that have an interview, it is free, which I have no plans on charging it, but it is an hour or so of my time. And that's time where I could be serving someone who's paying me. So obviously the challenge would be, finding guests. I've had success on, there's podcast groups that you can be a guest or be a request to be a guest, or that, like on Facebook, which I've joined a couple of those and I've got a couple interviews from that. It comes from just someone comes to mind and I reach out to them, Facebook Messenger or LinkedIn, or text them, or previous people that I've served before in a paid relationship. Hey, we haven't spoken in a while. Would you like to be on the podcast? And, generally they say, what's the podcast about? Oh, I coach you on the spot. And they're like, oh, really? I said, yeah. So I'll give them a couple episodes and say, yeah, it sounds like about like this, but you'll be the one on the other side of the mic. And some say yes and some don't. And they'll find somebody else to talk to.
My brain was processing as well while you were talking about that, because the challenge, it sounds like in some way, is that you are in a way giving your time for free right then. And it does kind of take away from when you could be making money during that same hour. And I don't know if this is a great idea for you. I'm hoping it's at least something that the listener could think about. But what if you offered 2-for-1 coaching, meaning like you get 2 calls for the price of 1 call? You're somebody who would probably hire me, but the first call is going to be recorded in part of my podcast, and the second call is just you alone. Would that be something that would help you to be able to overcome that challenge?
Yeah, I mean, that could definitely work. I could definitely see how that could work. Obviously, if people don't really know you, don't really have a relationship built with you, I wouldn't pay someone to be on their podcast if I didn't know who they were. Or
okay. So these are really people that you're already connected with, or not always?
I would say almost exclusively, yes. I have some kind of relationship with them at some point in the past, either maybe via Facebook Messenger, or we were in a different group together, or I saw their post on Facebook and made a comment. We just started having a conversation. I've only had less than a handful of people, like basically the first time we met is the first time we were on Zoom, which was awkward.
Yeah.
One of them was supposed to be this one guy who I was talking to. And when it was time for the podcast, him and his buddy showed up, which I never even mentioned. Like, it wasn't even brought up. And I was like, I'm going to talk to both of you. And they were like, yeah, okay, that's awkward, but all right, here we go. Let's see what happens. So
how did it go? How did that one go?
It was awkward because I was planning on spending a one-on-one, because if it's one,
it's not masterclass of 2 or 3.
Right? And it's not masterclass of a group, anything besides one-on-one is a group. Cool. And they kind of fed off each other. Then they started having their own conversation. And I'm like, what are we even doing here? But that's the only one where I'm like, okay, well, whatever. And then, but yeah, other than that, most time I've had some kind of connection with the person I'm speaking to in some way, shape, or form or fashion.
Cool. David, how do you get your guests? I heard you kind of answer part of that being that you already had a prior relationship with most of them. I'm thinking if the listeners brand new, they're not sure how to get guests, they're not sure the best way to get guests, how to ask, what's kind of your process? Who do you reach out to? In what way do you reach out to them to get them to say, yes, I will be recorded and I will be on your show?
Nothing significant in life happens outside of a conversation. Nothing. I would challenge you to think of something that happened outside of a conversation. Like, are you married?
I'm not.
Okay. Have you ever had a girlfriend?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So did you ever get a date with her without speaking to her?
Not once in my life.
Exactly. Okay. So I think it starts with, who do you know that you'd like to have on your podcast? Ask them. I guarantee you all the listeners have some kind of phone. And if you don't know who to talk to, start with A and reach out to them and go down to Z. You probably have, I've got 700 contacts in my phone. If half of them said yes, you could release a podcast every single week for 6 years and never run out of people to talk to. So I wouldn't try to go after Joe Rogan, or just go with people you know, because what can it hurt? They're going to tell you no. Okay. Well, I like to tell people or ask people, if you don't ask, what are the chances of you getting a yes?
I agree. I love that. I started to quote you, and then you asked me a question and I was muted, and I freaked out, unmuted, and then answered the question. I think it was if I was married or something like that. So I don't know for sure if I quoted you right anymore, because I wasn't able to type until after I was speaking. So I think you said nothing worthwhile happens without a conversation. Does that sound accurate?
That's 100% accurate.
Okay. Yeah. And I love that. Quick random takeaway, but it's right along this same thing. I was around 2021. So this is like way more than 20 years ago. I was like in my 20s, and me and a couple of buddies who were plenty handsome or whatever, I was able to ask people out, and they were afraid to ask people out. And I remember being like, dude, if you don't do it, are you going to go out with them? And they're like, no. And I'm like, if you do it, will you go out with them? And they're like, maybe. And I'm like, is that not enough? Is that not enough to just be willing to go up to someone you don't know and say, hey, would you like to go to dinner? Or, hey, my name is Adam. What's your name? It can feel scary to find a guest. It can feel scary to ask that person if they want to work with you. It can feel scary to ask that guy out. But like David just said, nothing worthwhile happens without it starting with a conversation. So be willing to put yourself a little bit out there, because that's the only way you're going to get good results, as he said. I want to find out now, really just the best advice that you would have. Let's say somebody is about to launch a podcast, or they just launched it. What would be things that you've learned that maybe we haven't talked about yet today, but what have been some things that you learned that you really think would be really good advice for that person who's new into their journey? Okay.
So, I forgot one more thing. What else I learned too? My podcast art is off of Canva, which is free.
Yeah.
So you don't have to go pay an artist $10 million to get you a logo. So that was also what I needed to say too. What I would suggest to your listeners, I'm going to steal from, I heard Amy Porterfield say this: B+ work is good enough to get started. If you think about a B+, it's a whole lot closer than an A than it is a failing grade.
Yeah.
It's a handful of points away from being an A. But if we let the fear of perfectionism, you'll never launch your podcast, because the ducks are never going to be all in a row. Get it to where it's B+ to start. Not if you're 10 years old, you need to upgrade your equipment or whatever. Start with what you have now. Get it to B+, and when it gets to B+, go.
Love it. David, all of your links that you sent us are in the show notes. So the link to your podcast, your bio's there, link to your website, people can work with you and hire you, and as well as any social that you wanted to be shared is down in the show notes. So to the listener, that's how you can connect with David Creel from Masterclass of One. You can check out his podcast. And like we were talking about, the 3 different ways of podcasting. One is an interview, one is solo, and the other one is where you're having somebody being coached on your podcast. Well, the next episode on this podcast is going to be one of those solo episodes. And I took a little bit of time trying to get into your head and know what you're worried about, what you're looking for. And I made a pretty quick and easy, tangible piece of value that I think you should take. So if you got a little bit of time, don't go anywhere. I'll see you on the next episode. By the way, one way to ensure that you don't miss out on great content that we're producing on a regular basis is to make sure you're subscribed to the show. You need to be subscribed or following the Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to it in order not to miss all of that. And before I let you go, I need to mention, because a lot of people are asking, do you help? Can you help me with this? And the answer is yes. My company actually does it. It's called Grow Your Show. And you can find that at growyourshow.com. Our clients, they call us the easy button for podcaster because they simply have to record their episode. And they know that every single thing else is done for them. We sweat the hard stuff so you can be the star of your show. And if you would like help to make sure that we're editing and publishing and promoting and doing your social media, it's all in one place. And I think it's pretty affordable. You'll have to take a look for yourself. Just go to growyourshow.com and check us out. And by the way, I'll see you on the next episode.